Michael Sterling had everything: wealth, power, success. But a chance encounter with a boy selling candy on a cold New York night leads him to a shocking truth: the son he never knew existed. As he faces the past he abandoned, can he win back the family he lost? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The cold December wind whipped through the streets of New York City as Michael Sterling hurried toward his waiting car. At 53, Michael was at the peak of his career. His investment firm, Sterling Enterprises, had just closed their biggest deal of the year, and he was heading to celebrate with his executive team at an exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. Dressed in a tailored Italian suit and cashmere coat, Michael barely noticed the street vendors and homeless people that dotted the sidewalks. Years of single-minded ambition had trained him to look straight ahead, never to the sides where life's inconvenient realities might distract him from his goals. But something made him stop that evening. A small voice cutting through the city. "Noise candy for $1, please, just $1." Michael turned to see a little boy, no older than 8, standing on the corner. The child was shivering in a thin jacket, his hands red from the cold as he held up a small box of candy bars. There was something in the boy's determined expression that caught Michael's attention. "Sir, would you like some candy?" the boy asked, again his breath visible in the freezing air. For reasons Michael couldn't explain, he walked over and knelt before the child. "How much for the whole box?" The boy's eyes widened. "All of it?" Michael nodded, pulling out his wallet and extracting a $100 bill. "Here, you can go home early tonight." But instead of looking happy, the boy hesitated, his small fingers not reaching for the money. I can't go home yet," he said quietly. Michael frowned. "Why not?" "It's too cold for you to be out here." The child bit his lip, looking down at his worn sneakers. "I need to sell more. I promised Mum I'd sell the whole box." "Where are your parents?" Michael asked, suddenly aware that no responsible adult would have a child this young selling candy on a street corner in December. "It's just me and my mom," the boy answered. "She's sick, so I sell candy to help with money." Something deep inside Michael stirred, a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades: compassion. Without thinking, he pulled off his expensive coat and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. "What's your name, kid?" The boy looked up at him with grateful eyes. Daniel Carter." The name hit Michael like a physical blow. His vision blurred for a moment, and he had to steady himself against a nearby streetlight. Carter. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Your mother," Michael said, his voice suddenly hoarse. "Is her name Emma?" Daniel's eyes lit up. "You know my mum?" Michael felt dizzy. Emma Carter. The woman he had loved with his whole heart 20 years ago. The woman he had abandoned to pursue his ambitions. The woman who had begged him to stay, telling him that money wasn't everything. "Where do you live, Daniel?" Michael asked, his hand trembling slightly as he placed it on the boy's shoulder. "In the Bronx," Daniel replied. "Apartment 3B in the building with the broken steps. It's not very nice, but Mum says it's home." Michael nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Would it be okay if I took you home? I'd like to see your mother." Daniel looked uncertain. "Mom says I shouldn't go with strangers." "Your mother is right," Michael agreed. "But I'm not exactly a stranger. I'm an old friend. My driver is right over there. We can call your mom on the way if you want." After a moment's hesitation, Daniel nodded. Michael guided him to the waiting town car, instructing his driver, James, to take them to the Bronx address. During the ride, Michael's mind raced with memories. 20 years ago, he had been a different man. Young, ambitious, but also in love with Emma Carter, a kindergarten teacher with a heart of gold. They had planned a future together until a job offer from a prestigious investment firm had lured Michael away. "It's the opportunity of a lifetime," he had told Emma. "Just 2 years in London, then I'll come back." "Don't go," she had pleaded. "We have everything we need right here." But Michael hadn't listened. He had chosen career over love, convinced that success would bring happiness. 2 years had turned into 5, then 10. He had never returned to Emma, too ashamed to face her after breaking his promise, too consumed by his growing empire to look back. Now, as the car pulled up to a dilapidated apartment building in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city, Michael felt the full weight of his choices. "This is it," Daniel said, pointing to the building. Michael helped Daniel out of the car, instructing James to wait. The building was worse than he had imagined. Broken windows patched with cardboard, graffiti covering the walls, trash piled in the corners of the small lobby. They climbed 3 flights of stairs, Daniel leading the way with Michael's coat dragging behind him like a cape. At apartment 3B, Daniel knocked. "Mom, I'm home." The door opened slowly, and there she was, Emma Carter. Still beautiful at 48, though much thinner than Michael remembered. Her once vibrant face was pale, her chestnut hair streaked with gray. But her eyes, those same warm brown eyes, widened in shock when she saw who was standing beside her son. "Michael?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Hello, Emma," Michael replied, his own voice cracking with emotion. Emma grabbed the doorframe for support. "What are you doing here?" Daniel looked between them, confused. "Mom, he bought all my candy and gave me his coat. He said he knows you." Emma's gaze softened as she looked at her son, then hardened again when she looked back at Michael. "Daniel, go inside and wash up for dinner." "But Mom, now please." Once Daniel was inside, Emma stepped into the hallway, pulling the door nearly closed behind her. "Why are you here after all this time?" she demanded, her voice low but intense. Michael struggled to find the right words. I met Daniel by chance when he told me his name." "You put it together," Emma finished for him. "Yes, he's your son, Michael. The son I was trying to tell you about when you left for London." The confirmation hit Michael like a punch to the gut, even though he'd already suspected the truth. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you find me?" Emma laughed bitterly. "Find you? I tried, Michael. I called the office in London for months. Your assistant always said you were too busy. I wrote letters that were never answered. After a while, I got the message." Michael closed his eyes, remembering how he had instructed his staff to shield him from distractions from his past. "I had no idea, Emma, I swear." "Would it have made a difference?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "Would you have come back if you knew?" Before Michael could answer, a coughing fit overtook Emma. It was deep and racking, the kind that spoke of serious illness. "You're sick," Michael said, reaching out to steady her. Emma pulled away from his touch. "It's nothing. Just a cold." "Daniel said you're sick. That's why he's selling candy." Emma's face softened with sadness. "He shouldn't have told you that. He worries too much." "What is it, Emma? What's wrong?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Lung cancer. Stage 3. The treatments are expensive, and I had to stop working a few months ago. Daniel thinks he's helping by selling candy after school." Michael felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath him. "Why didn't you ask for help? I could have asked you for money." Emma shook her head. "My pride wouldn't allow it, Michael, not after how things ended between us." The door opened wider, and Daniel peeked out. "Mom, I'm hungry, and you need to take your medicine." Emma smiled at her son. "I'll be right there, sweetie." Michael made a sudden decision. "Let me help, Emma, please. Not for you or me, but for Daniel." Emma looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "It's been 20 years, Michael. You can't just walk back into our lives and play hero." "I know that," Michael said quietly, "but at least let me try to make amends. Let me help with your treatment, with a better place to live. We don't need your charity." "It's not charity," Michael insisted. "It's my responsibility. Daniel is my son." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "A father is more than DNA, Michael. A father is someone who's there for every fever, every nightmare, every school play. You've been none of those things." The truth of her words stung, but Michael stood his ground. "Then let me start now. It's not too late." From inside the apartment, Daniel called out again. "Mom, please come in. It's cold in the hallway." Emma sighed, her resistance weakening. "We can talk about this later. Daniel doesn't know about you, and I'm not ready to tell him yet." Michael nodded, understanding. "Can I come back tomorrow, please, Emma?" After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "Tomorrow afternoon, Daniel will be at school." As Michael turned to leave, Emma called after him. "Michael, your coat." He looked back at her with a sad smile. "Keep it, it's cold tonight." Walking back to his car, Michael felt a strange mixture of emotions. Guilt for the years he had missed, anger at himself for being so blind to what truly mattered, but also a tiny spark of hope. Tomorrow he would see Emma again, and maybe, just maybe, he could begin to make things right. As James drove him back to Manhattan, Michael stared out the window at the city lights, seeing them through new eyes. For 20 years, he had built an empire of wealth and power, believing it would bring him happiness. Now he realized that his greatest treasure, his son, had been living in poverty just a few miles away. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had everything money could buy, yet he had nothing that truly mattered. Back in his penthouse apartment with its panoramic views of Central Park, Michael couldn't sleep. The stark contrast between his luxurious lifestyle and the conditions Emma and Daniel were living in haunted him. He spent the night making calls, pulling strings, determined to give Emma the best medical care available. By morning, he had arranged for Emma to be seen by the top oncologist in the country, set up a trust fund for Daniel's education, and instructed his lawyer to find them a better apartment in a safe neighborhood. It was the least he could do. A first step in what he knew would be a long journey toward redemption. As dawn broke over the city, Michael made a promise to himself. He would make things right with Emma and Daniel, no matter what it took. He had spent 20 years chasing fortune, convinced that success meant everything, only to realize that the greatest treasure he had ever had was the family he had left behind. The next afternoon, Michael arrived at Emma's apartment building precisely at 2 o'clock. He had spent the morning canceling meetings and rearranging his schedule, something he had never done for anyone before. His assistant, Vanessa, had been shocked when he told her to clear his calendar for the next few weeks. But Mr. Sterling, "The board meeting is on Thursday, and you have the charity gala on Saturday," she had protested. "Handle it, Vanessa," Michael had replied firmly. "Some things are more important." Now, as he climbed the broken steps to apartment 3B, Michael felt nervous in a way he hadn't experienced in decades. He was used to commanding boardrooms and closing million-dollar deals, but facing Emma again made his palms sweat. He knocked softly, and a moment later, Emma opened the door. She looked even more tired than yesterday, dressed in simple jeans and a faded sweater. "You came," she said, stepping aside to let him in. The apartment was small but clean, with worn furniture and faded curtains. Photos of Daniel covered the walls. Birthday parties, school pictures, and candid shots of him laughing. A life documented in snapshots. A life Michael had missed entirely. "Would you like some coffee?" Emma asked, her voice formal, as if she was speaking to a stranger. "Yes, thank you," Michael replied, taking a seat at the small kitchen table. As Emma prepared the coffee, Michael noticed the pill bottles lined up on the counter. Cancer medications, pain relievers, anti-nausea drugs. The reality of her illness hit him again. "I spoke to Dr. Robert Chen this morning," Michael said as Emma placed a chipped mug in front of him. "He's the head of oncology at Memorial Sloan Kettering. He's willing to see you tomorrow." Emma stiffened. "I already have a doctor at the county hospital." "Emma, please," Michael urged. "Dr. Chen is the best in the country. Let him at least give you a second opinion." Emma sat across from him, rapping, her thin fingers around her own mug. "I can't afford specialists, Michael. My insurance barely covers the basics." "I'll cover everything," Michael said quickly. "The treatments, medications, whatever you need." Emma's eyes flashed with a hint of her old spirit. "I didn't ask you here for money." "I know," Michael said softly. "But please let me do this. Not for you or me, but for Daniel. He needs his mother." At the mention of her son's name, Emma's resistance crumbled slightly. After a long pause, she nodded. "All right, for Daniel." Relief washed over Michael. "Thank you. I've arranged for a car to pick you up at 10 tomorrow morning." Emma took a sip of her coffee, then placed the mug down carefully. "Now tell me why you're really here, Michael. After 20 years, why come back now?" Michael looked into her eyes, remembering the young woman he had once loved so desperately. Meeting Daniel it was like being struck by lightning. Suddenly, everything I thought was important, The money, the power, the success, it all seemed meaningless. One day changes 20 years of priorities, Emma asked skeptically. No, Michael admitted. I've been empty for a long time. I just didn't want to admit it. Seeing Daniel, learning he's my son, it just made me finally face the truth. Emma's expression softened slightly. And what is the truth, Michael? That I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left you, he said simply. That I've spent 20 years chasing the wrong things. Emma was quiet for a moment, absently, tracing the rim of her coffee mug. You broke my heart, you know. I waited for you to call, to write, to come back. I waited until I couldn't anymore. I was a fool, Michael said, his voice thick with regret. There's no excuse for what I did. No, there isn't, Emma agreed. But life went on. I had Daniel to think about. I couldn't waste time being bitter. Michael looked around the small apartment again. It must have been hard, raising him alone. Emma smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. Hard, yes, but worth every minute. He's a good boy, Michael, smart, kind, always thinking of others. Like his mother, Michael said softly. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, the years between them seemed to fade away. Then Emma looked down, breaking the connection. What happens now, she asked. You've seen us, offered your help. Will you disappear again once your conscience is clear? The question stung, but Michael knew he deserved it. No, Emma. I want to be part of Daniel's life, if you'll let me, and I want to help you get better. Emma studied him as if trying to gauge his sincerity. Daniel will have questions about who you are, why you're suddenly in our lives. What have you told him about his father? Michael asked. The truth, Emma replied, that his father and I loved each other once, but he had to go away for work and couldn't come back. I never wanted Daniel to feel abandoned or unwanted. Michael felt a rush of gratitude for her kindness. She could have painted him as a villain, but instead she had protected their son from the full pain of his absence. Thank you for that, he said. When do you think we should tell him who I am? Emma sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Let's see how my appointment goes tomorrow, one step at a time. They talked for another hour, filling in the gaps of 20 years apart. Emma told him about her life as a single mother, working as a teacher until her illness forced her to stop. Michael shared stories of his rise in the business world, though they seemed hollow as he recounted them. As he was preparing to leave, Michael hesitated at the door. There's one more thing, Emma. I found a furnished apartment in a better neighborhood. It's close to Daniel's school and near the hospital. I'd like you both to move in. Emma's expression immediately hardened. We can't accept that, Michael. It's not a gift, Michael clarified quickly. Consider it a loan until you're better. The building has security, and there's an elevator so you won't have to climb stairs on your bad days. I don't want Daniel to get used to things we can't afford on our own, Emma explained. Then think of it as temporary, Michael pressed, just until your treatment is complete. Please, Emma. This place is no good for someone fighting cancer. Emma looked around her small apartment, and Michael could see the conflict in her eyes. Pride versus practicality. Finally, she nodded reluctantly. Just until I'm better, she agreed, and I'll pay you back someday. Whatever you want, Michael said, relieved. As he headed back to his car, Michael felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in decades, he felt like he was doing something truly meaningful. The next morning, as promised, a private car picked Emma up for her appointment with Dr. Chen. Michael met her at the hospital, sitting beside her as the oncologist reviewed her medical records and ordered additional tests. Your current treatment plan is inadequate, Dr. Chen told them bluntly. With your type of lung cancer, you need a more aggressive approach. Emma clutched Michael's hand unconsciously as the doctor outlined a new treatment plan, a combination of targeted therapy drugs and immunotherapy that showed promising results in cases like hers. Will it work? Emma asked, her voice small. Dr. Chen's expression was serious but not without hope. There are no guarantees, Ms. Carter, but this gives you a better chance than what you're currently receiving. After the appointment, Michael drove Emma home. She was quiet, processing the information they had received. Are you okay? Michael asked as they pulled up to her building. Emma turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I've been preparing myself to die, Michael. For months now, I've been thinking about Daniel. about what would happen to him after I'm gone, and now you have hope, Michael finished for her, reaching over to take her hand. Emma nodded, squeezing his fingers. Yes, and it's terrifying in its own way. You won't face it alone, Michael promised. I'm here now. That evening, Michael returned to Emma's apartment for dinner. He had brought groceries, real food to replace the meager contents of her refrigerator, and insisted on cooking for them. Daniel was wary at first, watching Michael with curious eyes as he moved around their tiny kitchen. But when Michael asked for his help with the pasta sauce, the boy's reserve began to melt. Mom says you're an old friend, Daniel said as he stirred the sauce carefully. That's right, Michael replied, chopping vegetables beside him. Your mom and I knew each other a long time ago. Before I was born? Michael's hand faltered slightly. Yes, before you were born. Daniel considered this information. Mom doesn't have many friends, just Mrs. Rodriguez next door and some of the other teachers. From her school. Well, she has me now, Michael said, and I'm going to help her get better. Daniel looked up at him, hope shining in his eyes so much like Michael's own. Really, you can make her better? Michael crouched down to Daniel's level. I'm going to make sure she gets the best doctors and medicine. We'll all work together to help her. During dinner, Michael watched as Emma tried to eat despite her lack of appetite. Daniel chatted excitedly about school and his friends, especially about the science fair coming up. I'm making a model of the solar system, he explained. But it's hard because I don't have all the stuff I need. I could help you with that, Michael offered, looking to Emma for permission. She nodded slightly, and Daniel's face lit up. Really? That would be awesome. After dinner, as Daniel did his homework at the kitchen table, Michael helped Emma wash the dishes. He's amazing, Michael said quietly. You've done an incredible job with him, Emma. He's my whole world, she replied simply. The next few days fell into a pattern. Michael would come by in the evenings, bringing dinner and spending time with Daniel. On the weekend, he took them to see the new apartment he had found. Located in a safe neighborhood with good schools, the two-bedroom apartment was modest by Michael's standards, but luxurious compared to where Emma and Daniel had been living. It had large windows that let in plenty of light, new appliances in the kitchen, and was fully furnished with comfortable, simple pieces. This is too much, Emma protested as they toured the space. Mom, look at my room, Daniel called excitedly, bouncing on the bed. It has a desk for my homework and shelves for my books. Seeing her son's happiness, Emma's resistance weakened. They moved in the following weekend, with Michael hiring movers to pack and transport their few belongings. As Emma began her new treatment, the side effects hit her hard. There were days when she could barely get out of bed, when the nausea and fatigue overwhelmed her. On those days, Michael would arrive early, before Daniel woke up for school. He would make breakfast, pack Daniel's lunch, and see him off to the school bus. You don't have to do all this, Emma told him one morning, wrapped in a robe as she watched him clean up the breakfast dishes. I want to, Michael replied. Besides, my company has excellent management. They're doing fine without me micromanaging everything. Emma studied him, a small smile on her pale face. You've changed, Michael Sterling. I hope so, he said seriously. As the weeks passed, Michael found himself drawn more and more into Emma and Daniel's lives. He helped Daniel with his science project, spent evenings playing board games with them, and took late-night calls when Emma's pain was too much to bear. One evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, Emma approached Michael with determination in her eyes. I think it's time to tell him, she said. He keeps asking questions about you, about why you're spending so much time with us. Michael felt a mixture of excitement and terror. Are you sure? What if he hates me for not being there all these years? Emma touched his arm gently. He's 8 years old, Michael. He's not going to hate you, but he deserves to know the truth. The next day was Saturday. They took Daniel to Central Park, his favorite place in the city. After feeding the ducks and getting ice cream, they sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Daniel, Emma began, her voice gentle, remember how I told you that your father had to go away for work before you were born? Daniel nodded, licking his ice cream cone. And that's why he couldn't be with us? Another nod. Emma took a deep breath. Well, the truth is, your father didn't know about you. He went away before I could tell him that I was going to have a baby. Daniel stopped eating his ice cream, looking confused. He didn't know about me? No, sweetheart, he didn't. Until recently. Daniel's eyes widened as understanding dawned. He looked at Michael, then back at his mother. Is Michael my dad? Emma nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, Daniel. Michael is your father. Daniel stared at Michael, his ice cream forgotten and starting to drip onto his hand. You're my dad? Really? Michael nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Yes, Daniel, I'm your father, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you all these years. For a moment, Daniel just stared at him, processing this revelation. Then, to both adults' surprise, he grinned widely. I knew it. Billy at school said you looked like me, but I told him you were just Mom's friend. The simplicity of his reaction, the lack of anger or resentment, was overwhelming. Michael felt tears spring to his eyes. Are you mad at me? He asked hesitantly. Daniel considered the question seriously. Were you really not there because you didn't know about me? Not because you didn't want me? I didn't know, Michael confirmed. If I had known about you, I would have come back. I would have been here. Daniel seemed satisfied with this answer. Then I'm not mad, but you're staying now, right? You're not going away again? Michael looked at Emma, seeking permission in her eyes before answering. She gave him a small nod. I'm staying, Michael promised. I want to be part of your life, if that's okay with you. Daniel's response was to launch himself at Michael, wrapping his small arms around his neck in a tight hug. That's okay with me, he whispered. Over Daniel's shoulder, Michael's eyes met Emma's. She was crying silently, tears sliding down her cheeks as she watched her son embrace his father for the first time. As they walked through the park together, Daniel between them holding both their hands, Michael felt a completeness he had never known before. This was what had been missing from his life, not more money or power or success, but this: family, love, belonging. That night, after tucking Daniel into bed, a privilege Michael cherished, he sat with Emma in the living room of their new apartment. Thank you, he said simply, for letting me into his life, into your lives. Emma's smile was tentative but genuine. He needs his father, Michael, and seeing how happy he is, it makes everything else worth it. Michael reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. What about you, Emma? Can you ever forgive me for leaving, for missing all those years? Emma was quiet for a long moment, her fingers lightly entwined with his. I'm working on it, she said finally. One day at a time. It wasn't a complete forgiveness, but it was a beginning, and for Michael Sterling, who had spent 20 years chasing the wrong dreams, it was more than enough. As he left the apartment that night, promising to return the next morning for Daniel's soccer game, Michael felt lighter than he had in years. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. Emma's cancer was serious, and rebuilding their trust would take time. But for the first time in his life, Michael was certain he was exactly where he belonged. Walking to his car, he looked up at the apartment windows, seeing the warm glow of the lights Emma had left on for him. In that moment, Michael made a silent vow. He would never again mistake wealth for worth or success for happiness. The true measure of a man wasn't in his bank account or business empire, but in how well he loved and was loved in return, and by that measure, Michael Sterling was just beginning to understand what it meant to be truly rich. Spring arrived in New York City, bringing new life to the parks and streets. For Michael, Emma, and Daniel, the past 3 months had been a roller coaster of emotions and adjustments as they learned to be a family. Michael had transformed his life completely. He had delegated most of his day-to-day responsibilities at Sterling Enterprises to his trusted executives, keeping only major decisions under his direct control. His days now revolved around Daniel's school schedule and Emma's treatment appointments. Emma's health was the greatest concern. The aggressive treatment Dr. Chen had prescribed was taking its toll on her body. Some days were better than others, but the bad days were devastating to witness. Michael would often find her hunched over the bathroom toilet, her thin body racked with nausea, or curled up in bed too weak to move. On one particularly difficult morning in April, Michael arrived at the apartment to find Daniel sitting alone at the breakfast table, still in his pajamas, though it was nearly time for school. "Hey, buddy," Michael said, setting down the grocery bags he'd brought. "Why aren't you dressed for school?" Daniel looked up, his eyes worried. "Mom's really sick today. She couldn't get out of bed." Michael's chest tightened. "Did you eat breakfast?" Daniel shook his head. "I didn't want to bother Mom." "You're never a bother," Michael assured him, quickly preparing cereal and orange juice. "Eat up and I'll check on your mum." He found Emma in her bedroom, pale and shivering despite the warm blankets covering her. "Emma," he called softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. She opened her eyes slowly, trying to smile. "Sorry, I couldn't get up to help Daniel." "Don't apologize," Michael said, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "You're burning up. I'm calling Dr. Chen." Despite Emma's weak protests, Michael called the oncologist, who advised bringing her to the hospital immediately. He arranged for Daniel's school to be notified, then called his neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez to watch Daniel for the day. At the hospital, tests revealed that Emma had developed an infection, a dangerous complication for someone with her weakened immune system. She was admitted immediately, with doctors starting her on powerful antibiotics. Michael stayed by her side, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness. When visiting hours ended, he refused to leave. "Sir, only immediate family can stay overnight," a nurse informed him. "I'm her husband," Michael lied without hesitation. The words felt right somehow, even though they weren't true. The nurse nodded sympathetically and brought him a reclining chair to sleep in. Through the night, Michael maintained his vigil, dozing fitfully between checking Emma's monitors and speaking with the medical staff during their rounds. In the early hours of the morning, Emma's fever broke. She opened her eyes to find Michael asleep in the chair beside her bed, his hand still holding hers. She studied his face, the worry lines on his forehead, the silver threading through his dark hair, the stubble on his jaw. He looked exhausted, but remained handsome in the way that had first attracted her all those years ago. She squeezed his hand gently, and he woke instantly. "Emma," he said, sitting up straight. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she replied, her voice raspy. "You stayed all night?" Michael nodded. "Of course I did. Daniel is with Mrs. Rodriguez. He wanted to come, but I thought it was better to wait until you were stronger." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "3 months ago, I was alone in this fight. Now you have me," Michael finished, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it softly. "And I'm not going anywhere." Emma's hospital stay lasted a week. Michael divided his time between her bedside and caring for Daniel, bringing their son for short visits when Emma felt strong enough. He worked remotely from her hospital room, taking calls and video conferences in the hallway when necessary. When Emma was finally released, Dr. Chen had difficult news for them. "The infection has delayed your treatment schedule," he explained, in his office. "We need to wait until you've fully recovered before continuing. This means we'll need to extend the overall treatment timeline." Emma nodded stoically, but Michael could see the fear in her eyes. More treatment meant more suffering, more uncertainty. "What about her prognosis?" Michael asked directly. "Has this setback affected her chances?" Dr. Chen's expression was carefully neutral. "It's not ideal, but we're still on a path toward potential remission. The key word is potential, Mr. Sterling. I want to be honest with both of you." In the car ride home, Emma was quiet, staring out the window at the spring sunshine that seemed to mock their situation. "I'm scared, Michael," she finally admitted, her voice small. Michael reached across the console to take her hand. "I know. But we'll face this together, one day at a time." Back at the apartment, they fell into a new routine. Michael hired a part-time nurse to help on days when Emma's strength failed her. He set up a small office in the apartment's second bedroom, which he shared with Daniel, converting it into a space where he could work while still being close to. Daniel, for his part, tried to be the brave little soldier. He excelled in school, helped with simple chores around the apartment, and never complained when plans had to be changed because of his mother's condition. But sometimes Michael would find him sitting alone, looking at old photos of Emma when she was healthy, tears silently tracking down his cheeks. On one such occasion, Michael sat beside his son, putting an arm around his small shoulders. "It's okay to be sad," he said gently. Daniel leaned into him. "Is Mom going to die?" The question hit Michael like a physical blow. He wanted to offer reassurances, to promise that everything would be fine, but he couldn't lie to his son. "The doctors are doing everything they can," he said carefully, "and your mom is fighting very hard." "But what if she dies?" Daniel persisted, looking up at Michael with eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "What will happen to me?" Michael pulled him closer. "You will never be alone, Daniel. No matter what happens, I will always be here for you. You're my son and nothing will ever change that." Daniel nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "Can we make Mom's favorite dinner tonight? The chicken soup with dumplings?" "Absolutely," Michael agreed, grateful for his son's resilience. As April turned to May, Emma's strength gradually returned, and she was able to resume her treatments. The side effects were still brutal, but she faced them with a determination that amazed Michael. One evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, Michael found Emma sitting on the small balcony of their apartment, wrapped in a blanket, despite the mild spring air. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Emma patted the chair beside her. "I was just thinking about how much my life has changed in the past few months." Michael sat down, looking out at the city lights. "For the better, I hope." "In many ways, yes," Emma admitted. "Daniel is happier than I've seen him in a long time. Having his father in his life, it's meant everything to him. And to me," Michael added softly. Emma turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Why did you never marry, Michael? All these years, someone like you, successful, handsome, you must have had opportunities." Michael considered the question. "I came close once, about 10 years ago. Caroline was perfect on paper. Intelligent, beautiful, from the right social circle. Everyone expected us to get engaged." "What happened?" "I couldn't do it," Michael said simply. "Something was always missing. I told myself it was because I was too focused on my career. But the truth is, no one ever measured up to what we had, Emma." Emma's eyes widened slightly. "Michael, I'm not saying this to pressure you," he added quickly. "I know. Things are complicated. I know I hurt you in ways that might be unforgivable. I just want you to know that there's never been anyone else who mattered the way you did, the way you do." Emma was quiet for a long moment, her fingers playing with the edge of her blanket. "I didn't date much either," she finally said. "Between work and raising Daniel, there wasn't much time. There were a few men over the years, but nothing serious." Michael nodded, trying to ignore the irrational jealousy he felt at the thought of Emma with other men. "We've both been lonely, haven't we?" "Yes," Emma acknowledged. "But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Being alone taught me to be strong, to depend on myself. And now what?" Michael prompted when she didn't continue. "Now I'm learning to let someone help me," she said, looking at him directly. "And it's harder than I expected." Michael moved his chair closer to hers, taking her hand. "Thank you for letting me be that someone." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the city twinkle below them. Then, to Michael's surprise, Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. He held perfectly still, afraid to break the moment, as a feeling of rightness settled over him. The next morning, Michael received a call from his assistant, Vanessa. "Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a situation at the office that requires your immediate attention." Michael frowned. "What kind of situation?" "Robert Donovan from the board is questioning some of your recent decisions. He's called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. I think they're planning a vote of no confidence." Michael felt his stomach drop. Robert Donovan had always been ambitious, always looking for ways to increase his influence within the company. With Michael's absence over the past few months, he must have seen an opportunity. "I'll be there," Michael said tersely, ending the call. Emma, who had been preparing breakfast, looked at him with concern. "Problems at work?" Michael nodded grimly. "Nothing I can't handle, but I need to go into the office today." "Of course," Emma said. "We'll be fine here." Michael hesitated, torn between his responsibilities to his company and his desire to stay with Emma and Daniel. "Go," Emma urged him gently. "You've put your entire life on hold for us." It's okay to take care of your business too. I'll be back as soon as I can, Michael promised, kissing the top of Daniel's head as the boy ate his cereal. At Sterling Enterprises, Michael found the executive floor buzzing with tension. His assistant met him at the elevator, briefing him quickly as they walked to the boardroom. Donovan has been meeting privately with several board members, she explained. He's arguing that your absence has been detrimental to the company's performance, has it? Michael asked sharply. Vanessa shook her head. No, sir. First quarter profits are actually up 12%, but Donovan is suggesting that's despite your absence, not because of it. Michael nodded, his jaw tight as they reached the boardroom doors. Inside, 12 men and women in expensive suits sat around the long table. Robert Donovan, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, occupied the chair at the far end, Michael's chair. Conversation stopped abruptly as Michael entered. Michael, Donovan said smoothly, standing. We weren't sure you'd join us. It's still my company, Robert, Michael replied evenly, taking his rightful place at the head of the table. Now I understand there are concerns about my recent work arrangements. For the next 2 hours, Michael defended his leadership, presenting facts and figures that demonstrated the company's continued growth under his more remote management style. He outlined the delegation structure he had implemented and showed how it had actually improved efficiency in several departments. The truth is, he concluded, Sterling Enterprises doesn't need me micromanaging every decision anymore. We have excellent people at every level, and by stepping back, I've allowed their talents to shine. Most of the board members seemed satisfied with his explanation, but Donovan remained skeptical. And the real reason for your sudden disengagement, he pressed. Rumors suggest you've been spending time with a woman and her child. Is this true? Michael felt a flash of anger at the invasion of his privacy. My personal life is not relevant to this discussion, Robert. It is if it affects the company, Donovan insisted. Are you planning to marry? Will there be stepchildren? These are succession issues the board should be aware of. Before Michael could respond, his phone rang. Seeing it was from Emma's number, he excused himself and stepped out of the boardroom. Emma, is everything okay? Emma's voice was tight with worry. It's Daniel. He fell during recess and broke his arm. We're at the emergency room. I'm on my way, Michael said without hesitation, ending the call and returning to the boardroom. He looked around at the expectant faces and made a decision. Ladies and gentlemen, my son has been injured at school. I need to go to him now. Your son? Donovan repeated, his eyebrows rising in surprise. Yes, Robert, my son, Michael confirmed, gathering his papers. 8 years old, smart as a whip, and currently in pain at the emergency room. So you'll forgive me if I consider this meeting adjourned. He walked to the door, then turned back. Oh, and if anyone here doubts my commitment to this company, I suggest you review the quarterly reports. Sterling Enterprises is doing just fine. But if my leadership style no longer suits the board's vision, you're welcome to buy out my controlling interest. At market value, of course. With that, he left, heading straight to the hospital where Emma and Daniel waited. He found them in a curtained area of the emergency department, Daniel looking small and pale on the examination table, his left arm in a temporary splint. Dad. Daniel called when he saw him, his face lighting up despite his pain. The word still gave Michael a thrill every time he heard it. He moved quickly to Daniel's side, careful not to jostle his injured arm. Hey, buddy. That looks like it hurts. Daniel nodded bravely. The doctor said I need a cast. Can I get a blue one? Any color you want, Michael assured him, looking to Emma for details. Clean break of the radius, she explained quietly. They'll put a cast on, and it should heal completely in 6 to 8 weeks. You left your meeting, Emma observed as they waited for the orthopedic specialist. Michael shrugged. Some things are more important. Emma's expression softened. You really have changed, Michael. For the better, I hope. She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Definitely for the better. After Daniel's arm was set in a bright blue cast, they returned home where Michael spent the afternoon making the boy comfortable, setting up a movie marathon in the living room and preparing his favorite foods. That evening, after Daniel had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from his ordeal, Michael found Emma in the kitchen, staring thoughtfully into a cup of tea. "Penny, for your thoughts," he said, sitting across from her. Emma looked up, her expression unreadable. "Did you really call Daniel your son at your board meeting?" Michael nodded. "It felt right. It is right." "What will people think? The great Michael Sterling suddenly a father to an 8-year-old boy?" "I don't care what people think," Michael replied honestly. "I only care what you and Daniel think." Emma was quiet for a moment, stirring her tea absently. "You know, before I got sick, I had a plan. I was saving every penny, working extra tutoring jobs on weekends. I wanted to give Daniel a better life, maybe move to a small house in the suburbs with a yard." "We can still do that," Michael said eagerly. "Once you're better, we can look for the perfect house. Whatever you want, Emma." Emma looked at him, her eyes serious. "That's just it, Michael. You come in with your wealth and your connections, and suddenly everything I struggled for seems unnecessary. Daniel can have everything now, the best schools, the best opportunities. But what happens if you leave again?" The question hung between them, raw and honest. "I won't leave," Michael said firmly. "I know you have no reason to believe me given our history, but I'm not the same man who left 20 years ago. That man was selfish and short-sighted. He thought success meant corner offices and million-dollar deals. I know better now." "What does success mean to you now?" Emma asked softly. Michael reached across the table, taking her hands in his. "This, being here with you and Daniel. Building a life together if you'll have me." Emma's eyes widened. "Michael, are you not proposing?" he clarified quickly. "Not yet. No, we're still finding our way back to each other. I know you're focused on getting well, as you should be, but I want you to know that's where I hope we're heading. Toward a future together, as a family." Tears filled Emma's eyes, but she didn't pull her hands away. "I spent so many years being angry with you, Michael, wondering how you could leave, how you could never even call to check if I was okay." "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Michael acknowledged, "but I'm asking for it anyway, and for a chance to prove that I can be the man you and Daniel deserve." Emma was quiet for a long moment, then said, "When I was diagnosed with cancer, I was terrified. Not of dying exactly, but of leaving Daniel alone. I prayed every night for a miracle, not for my sake, but for his." She looked up at Michael, a tear sliding down her cheek. "And then you appeared, like an answer to those prayers. How can I not see that as a sign?" Michael moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair and taking her in his arms. She felt fragile in his embrace, but there was strength in the way she held him back. "I don't know what the future holds," Emma whispered against his shoulder. "Whether I'll beat this cancer, how much time I have left. But I do know that I don't want to waste any more of it being angry or afraid." She pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. "I forgive you, Michael, and yes, I want us to try to be a family, for Daniel's sake, and for our own." Michael felt his heart swell with a joy he had never known in all his years of business success. This moment, this woman, the son sleeping in the next room, this was true wealth. As he held Emma in his arms, he silently renewed the vow he had made to himself months ago. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Emma's health, integrating their lives, navigating their renewed relationship, he would face them with the same determination that had made him a business success. But this time, he would be fighting for something far more precious than money or power. He would be fighting for his family, for love, for the life he should have chosen 20 years ago, and Michael Sterling did not intend to lose. Summer arrived in New York City with a wave of heat that seemed to slow everything down. For Emma, Michael, and Daniel, the warmer months brought both challenges and moments of unexpected joy. Emma's treatment continued, a grueling schedule of medications and hospital visits that left her exhausted. But by mid-June, Dr. Chen had cautiously positive news. "The tumors are shrinking," he told them during a follow-up appointment, pointing to the latest scan results on his computer screen. "It's not a complete remission yet, but we're moving in the right direction." Emma squeezed Michael's hand, tears of relief shining in her eyes. "So the treatment is working?" Dr. Chen nodded, his usually serious expression softening slightly. "Yes, it appears to be working. But we need to continue with the full course to ensure we eliminate as many cancer cells as possible." In the car on the way home, Emma was quiet, looking out the window at the summer sunshine bathing the city streets. "What are you thinking?" Michael asked, glancing over at her. "I'm thinking that I might actually have a future," she said softly. "For months now I've been afraid to hope, afraid to make plans. But today I feel like I can breathe again." Michael reached across to take her hand. "You do have a future, Emma. We all do. Together." That evening, they celebrated the good news with Daniel, ordering pizza and watching a movie in their pajamas. As Daniel laughed at the screen, his broken arm now in a smaller cast, Michael looked at Emma, curled up on the couch beside him, and felt a contentment he had never known. In his years of business success, the next morning Michael woke early. He had been thinking about something for weeks now, and the positive medical news had given him the push he needed. After dropping Daniel at his summer day camp, he drove to a quiet neighborhood in Westchester County. The real estate agent was waiting for him outside a charming colonial house with a wide front porch and red shutters. The yard was spacious, with mature trees providing shade and plenty of room for a boy to play. "Mr. Sterling," the agent greeted him warmly. "I think you're going to love this property. It has everything you mentioned, 4 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, good schools nearby, and it's only a 30-minute drive to the city." Michael nodded, following her inside. The house was bright and welcoming, with hardwood floors and large windows that let in plenty of light. As he toured the rooms, he could picture Emma cooking in the kitchen, Daniel doing homework at the dining room table, family gatherings in the living room with its brick fireplace. "There's one more feature I think you'll appreciate," the agent said, leading him to the backyard. The previous owners installed a swimming pool, and there's still plenty of yard space for gardening or play equipment. Michael walked around the pool area, noting the sturdy fence that made it safe for children. Beyond it was a level lawn where Daniel could kick a soccer ball or ride a bike. At the far end of the property, an old oak tree spread its branches wide. "Perfect for a tree house. I'll take it," Michael said decisively. The agent looked surprised. "Don't you want to discuss it with your family first?" Michael smiled, realizing how different he was from the man who would have made this decision alone just a year ago. "You're right, but I'd like to put in an offer today, contingent on their approval." That afternoon, Michael picked Daniel up from camp earlier than usual. "Where are we going?" Daniel asked as Michael drove in an unfamiliar direction. "It's a surprise," Michael replied with a smile. "For you and your mom." When they arrived at the house, Emma looked confused as they pulled into the driveway. "Michael, what is this?" she asked as they got out of the car. "Just something I want you both to see," he said, leading them to the front door where the real estate agent waited with the keys. As they toured the house, Daniel raced from room to room with excitement. "Mom, look at this bedroom. Can this be mine? And there's a pool in the backyard." Emma followed more slowly, her expression a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. When they reached the master bedroom with its sitting area and ensuite bathroom, she turned to Michael. "This is beautiful, but just see the whole house first," Michael interrupted gently. "Then we'll talk." The backyard sealed the deal for Daniel. He ran across the lawn, already planning where his soccer goal would go, which tree branches would be best for climbing. As Daniel explored, Emma and Michael stood on the back deck. "You bought this house, didn't you?" Emma asked quietly. Michael shook his head. "No, I made an offer, but it's contingent on your approval. This is a decision we need to make together as a family." Emma looked out at Daniel, who was now examining the pool with fascination. "It's perfect, Michael. It's exactly what I always dreamed of giving him. Space to play, good schools, safety. But we can't afford this." "I can," Michael said simply. "But that's not the point. The point is, do you want to live here with me?" Emma turned to face him fully. "What exactly are you asking, Michael?" Michael took both her hands in his. "I'm asking you to marry me, Emma. To make what we've been building these past few months official. To be a real family, you, me, and Daniel." Emma's eyes widened. "Michael, I know it might seem fast," he continued quickly, "but we're not exactly starting from scratch, are we? We have history, we have Daniel, and these months together, they've been the happiest of my life despite everything with your illness." Emma looked down at their joined hands. "What about your work? Your life in the city?" "I can work from here most days," Michael assured her. The company is stable, even with my reduced presence, and this is only half an hour from the city when I do need to go in." He paused, then added, "But if you'd rather stay in the city or find a different house, we can do that too. This isn't about the house, Emma. It's about us." Emma looked back at Daniel, who had found a soccer ball left behind by the previous owners and was dribbling it across the lawn. "He looks so happy here." "So do you," Michael observed softly. "I see the old Emma when you smile like that." Emma touched her cheek as if she could feel the smile he was referring to. "I didn't think I'd ever have this again. A chance at a normal life, a family." "Is that a yes?" Michael asked, his heart pounding. Emma looked at him, her eyes clear and direct. "Ask me properly." Michael blinked in surprise, then laughed. Without hesitation, he dropped to one knee on the wooden deck, still holding her hands. "Emma Carter, I loved you 20 years ago and I've never stopped loving you. These past months have shown me what truly matters in life. Will you marry me? Will you make me the happiest man in the world and be my wife?" Emma's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Yes, Michael Sterling, yes, I will marry you." Michael stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and hope he felt for their future. When they broke apart, they saw Daniel watching them from the lawn, his expression curious. "Daniel, come here, buddy," Michael called, keeping an arm around Emma's waist. Daniel jogged over, the soccer ball tucked under his good arm. "What's happening? Are we buying this house?" Michael and Emma exchanged glances, and Emma nodded for Michael to continue. "Yes, we're buying the house," Michael confirmed. "But there's something else too. I've asked your mom to marry me, and she said yes." Daniel's eyes grew wide. "You're getting married? For real?" "For real," Emma confirmed. "How do you feel about that?" Daniel considered for a moment, then broke into a huge grin. "Awesome. Does this mean we'll be a real family like the other kids at school?" "We already are a real family," Michael assured him, crouching down to Daniel's level. "The marriage just makes it official." Daniel threw his arms around both of them, nearly knocking them over with his enthusiasm. "This is the best day ever." As they drove back to the city that evening, plans already forming for their move to the new house, Michael felt a peace he had never known before. The pieces of his life, once scattered and incomplete, were finally falling into place. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Michael and Emma decided on a simple private wedding ceremony in August, giving them time to move into the new house and get settled. They didn't want to wait longer. Emma's health was improving, but the future still held uncertainties they didn't want to dwell on. The move itself went smoothly, with Michael hiring professionals to handle everything. Emma was caught between amusement and exasperation at his insistence on making things as easy as possible for her. "I'm not made of glass, Michael," she protested when he tried to stop her from unpacking a box of kitchen items. "The doctor said my strength is improving." "Humor." "Me," Michael replied, kissing her forehead. "I've waited 20 years to take care of you. Let me enjoy it." In the new house, they began to build routines that felt like a real family life. Breakfasts together before Michael drove Daniel to day camp and Emma to her treatment appointments. Evening walks around the neighborhood as Emma's strength returned. Weekends spent furnishing the house and exploring their new community. Daniel thrived in the suburban environment, quickly making friends with neighborhood children and spending hours in the backyard. He helped Michael build the treehouse they had planned, his broken arm now healed and free of its cast. As July turned to August, wedding preparations began in earnest. Emma had insisted on keeping things simple, just family and a few close friends, in the backyard of their new home. "No fancy hotel ballrooms or hundreds of guests," she had told Michael firmly. "That's not us." Michael had readily agreed. His days of impressing business associates with extravagance were behind him. What mattered now was making Emma happy. The night before the wedding, after Daniel had gone to bed, Michael found Emma sitting on the back deck looking at the stars. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, sitting beside her. Emma shook her head, smiling. "Just thinking about how much my life has changed in less than a year. Last fall I was diagnosed with cancer, living in that tiny apartment, wondering how I'd managed to raise Daniel alone. Now," she gestured at the beautiful home around them. "Do you ever worry that it's too good to be true?" Michael asked, voicing a fear he sometimes felt himself. Emma nodded slowly. Sometimes. I worry that the cancer will come back, that this happiness can't last. Michael took her hand. If it does come back, we'll face it together. Whatever happens, Emma, you're not alone anymore. Neither of us is. Emma leaned against his shoulder. I never expected to find love again, especially not with you. Life is strange that way. In the best possible way, Michael agreed, kissing the top of her head. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect August Saturday. Emma's sister Jane had arrived from Chicago to help her prepare, while Michael's brother David served as his best man. Daniel, proudly wearing a new suit, was the ring bearer. The ceremony itself was everything they had wanted, intimate, meaningful, and filled with love. As they exchanged vows under an arch of flowers in their backyard, surrounded by the small group of people who mattered most to them, Michael felt a sense of completion he had never known before. I, Michael, take you, Emma, to be my wife, he said, his voice strong and sure. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. Emma, beautiful in a simple white dress that complemented her still thin frame, repeated the vows with tears in her eyes, but joy in her voice. When the justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel was the first to cheer, jumping up and down with excitement. The reception was a relaxed affair, a catered lunch on the back lawn, music playing from speakers set up on the deck, children splashing in the pool under the watchful eyes of a hired lifeguard. It was worlds away from the high society events Michael had once frequented, and infinitely more satisfying. As evening approached and guests began to leave, Michael found Emma sitting on the edge of the pool, her bare feet dangling in the water. Daniel was playing a card game with his new friends from the neighborhood on the other side of the yard. Mrs. Sterling, Michael said, sitting beside her and removing his shoes to join her in the water. How does it feel? Emma smiled. The setting, sun casting a warm glow on her face. Strange but right. I never thought I'd have another last name. You could have kept Carter, Michael pointed out. I wouldn't have minded. Emma shook her head. No, I wanted this. I wanted us to be the Sterling family. You, me, and Daniel. Michael felt a lump in his throat at her words. Have I told you today how much I love you? Only about a dozen times, Emma laughed. But I don't mind hearing it again. Michael leaned over to kiss her softly. I love you, Emma Sterling. More than I ever thought possible. Emma rested her head on his shoulder, both of them watching Daniel across the yard. He's so happy, she observed. This morning he told me he'd been wishing for a dad for his birthday every year, and now his wish finally came true. Michael felt tears prick his eyes. I wish I could give him back those years. We can't change the past, Emma said gently, but we can make sure his future is filled with love and security. That's what matters now. As the summer days began to shorten and September approached, another milestone awaited them. Daniel would be starting third grade at his new school, and Emma had received more good news from Dr. Chen. The latest scans show no visible cancer cells, the doctor had told them during Emma's most recent appointment. While I hesitate to use the word remission so soon, the results are extremely encouraging. Emma had cried with relief, and Michael had held her, his own eyes damp with grateful tears. The night before Daniel's first day at his new school, the three of them sat on the back deck eating ice cream, enjoying the last evenings of summer. Are you nervous about tomorrow, buddy? Michael asked. Daniel shrugged, chocolate ice cream smeared around his mouth. A little, but Mom says it's okay to be nervous about new things. Your mum is very wise, Michael agreed, smiling at Emma. And Mrs. Rodriguez is coming to visit next weekend, Daniel continued excitedly. She said she wants to see our new house. Emma nodded. She's bringing her famous empanadas too. Michael marveled at how they had created this new life while maintaining connections to the old. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been such a help to Emma in their apartment building, had become a sort of honorary grandmother to Daniel. Dad, can we practice 5 baseball throws before bed? Daniel asked, finishing his ice cream. I want to be good at recess tomorrow. Sure thing, Michael agreed, his heart still warming every time Daniel called him Dad. As they played catch in the fading light, Emma watched from the deck, her smile content and peaceful. Later, after they had tucked Daniel into bed in his new room, decorated with solar system, posters and sports memorabilia, Michael and Emma retired to their own bedroom. "He's going to be fine tomorrow," Michael reassured her, sensing her anxiety about Daniel's first day. "I know," Emma sighed, settling into bed beside him. "I just worry. It's the mom in me." Michael pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "It's one of the things I love most about you. How much you care, how completely you love." Emma traced patterns on his chest with her finger. "Do you ever think about how easily we might have missed this? If you hadn't happened to meet Daniel that night on the street corner—" "I try not to think about it," Michael admitted. "It terrifies me how close I came to never knowing my own son, to never finding you again." "What made you stop that night?" Emma asked. "Out of all the children selling things on street corners in New York, what made Daniel different?" Michael was quiet for a moment, remembering. "His eyes," he finally said. "Something in his eyes reminded me of myself as a child. That determination, that seriousness. I didn't know why at the time, but now it makes sense. He is my son, after all." Emma lifted her head to look at him. "Do you believe in fate, Michael? That some things are meant to be?" "I never used to," Michael replied honestly. "I believed in making your own destiny, in hard work and strategy. But now, after everything that's happened? Yes, I think some things are meant to be." Emma settled back against his chest. "Me too. This, us, our family. It feels like coming home after a very long journey." Michael tightened his arms around her, profoundly grateful for this second chance. 20 years ago, he had made the biggest mistake of his life, choosing ambition over love. Now fate had given him an opportunity to make it right, to claim the life and love he should have never abandoned. The next morning, they stood together at the bus stop, watching Daniel board the school bus with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. As the bus pulled away, Daniel waved frantically from the window, his smile visible even at a distance. "There he goes," Emma said softly, leaning against Michael. "He'll be fine," Michael assured her, keeping an arm around her waist. "He's strong, like his mother." They walked back to the house hand in hand, the September sun warming their faces. The future stretched before them, not perfect or guaranteed, but full of possibility and hope. In his office at home, Michael had a photograph on his desk. It wasn't of a business accomplishment or a corporate award. It was a simple family portrait, taken at their wedding. Michael, Emma, and Daniel, their faces alight with happiness. Beside it sat a small box of candy, the same brand Daniel had been selling the night Michael found him. Michael had kept it as a reminder of how a simple act of kindness had changed all their lives. That evening, when Daniel returned home bursting with stories about his first day, Michael watched Emma's face as she listened to their son, the love and pride in her expression, the color returning to her cheeks as her health improved, the easy way she laughed at Daniel's jokes. These were the true measures of wealth, the real indicators of success. Later, after dinner, as they sat on the back deck watching the sunset, Daniel playing with the neighbor's dog on the lawn, Michael turned to Emma. "Are you happy?" he asked simply. Emma smiled, the question catching her by surprise. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "Are you?" Michael looked at his son, then back at his wife, his heart full to bursting. "I spent 20 years chasing what I thought was success, only to discover it was right here all along, in family and love, in the simple joy of being together." Emma leaned over to kiss him softly. "Better late than never, Mr. Sterling." "Indeed, Mrs. Sterling," Michael agreed, pulling her close. "Indeed." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the sky above their home, Michael Sterling, once defined solely by his business empire, knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found his true purpose. Not in boardrooms or bank accounts, but here in the heart of the family he had almost lost. And in that knowledge, he found a peace that no amount of money could ever buy. The end.